Welcome to A Case for Grace. My name is Kate Gray and I'm here today with my amazing co-host and husband, Jeffrey Slater. Today we're speaking about a really great topic because in this podcast we tackle all the tough questions. Who is God? What does it mean to be Christian? What is Christianity? Today we're talking about, is the Bible historically accurate? Or is it just a series of made-up stories by some dudes back in the day? Have you ever wondered that question? I know I certainly did, and that was one of the reasons that I kind of started to be interested in Christianity and the whole. I was like, well, if the Bible's real, it means the whole thing's real. Oh my goodness, I have to change my life. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, that was it for me too. First thing is I needed evidence that Christ died on the cross and then he rose again. I needed logic and reasonable evidence and historical evidence that actually happened. Once I was presented with that, that was a big domino. The second one was, okay, if that happened, and that did happen, then is this Bible real? And what constitutes being real and authentic and not made up? And if those two are real, then that means, wow, I've got a lot of shifts and changes to do because I had put my attention and faith in other things other than things that were not real. And that had a certain different outcome in life. And so knowing that the scriptures are real was a huge leap. And I'd love to hear, this is your area. You know, I know you study at Biola and university. I know that you're continually learning, but what are some of the evidence that had you come to the conclusion that it was real? And also you had to get over the fact that for many people listening as well, is that I had to get over that if it is real, am I willing to accept it?
Yeah. So you're right. This was the thing that first when I was like, okay, cool. I know I'm not in the new age anymore and I don't want to succumb to believing nothing means anything.
Well, what is new age? Let's define that for a second. Just a general.
Well, I mean, the new age is a series of like pseudo kind of science and psychology where there's multiple different, I guess, domains in the new age. Like one could be that you are God and the universe's energy is spiraling in your cells, and because of that you create your reality. Or it could be even Buddhism, it could be Hinduism. I mean, I've got the tattoo on my arm. It could be anything.
It could be the shamanic world as well.
The shamanic world, the mystical world, Kabbalah,
the Gnostics,
yoga, all of that would be more new age teachings. Ultimately, it teaches that you are the center of the universe. Except for some strands of Buddhism.
Yeah, the point is anything other than in Christ.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So when I decided I was no longer in that, and I knew that I didn't want to live a life where nothing meant anything, because that felt very bleh. A word can't actually describe it, just the sound bleh. And I was like, okay, cool. I was like, okay, I'm not going to judge God anymore by those who say they represent him, because that's not fair to him. I'm like, okay, let's get to this God business. If I can establish that the Bible is historically accurate or proven to be historically reliable is probably a better term.
Yeah, but what about if it didn't feel it? This is a big thing. What if it proved to be, but it didn't feel like it was?
Well, I wanted to take my feelings out of it, because being in the new age for 20 years and living my life on subjective truth and feelings led me to nowhere. So I was seeking logic and reasoning and scientific backing for my choices and decisions, and I wasn't going to go on feeling anymore, because I learned that I couldn't trust my feelings. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go through 10 pieces of evidence today, and I just want to start with the Bible actually has unparalleled manuscriptural support and evidence. There's more manuscripts, historical manuscripts from the Bible than any other historical document. Like we can look at Homer's Iliad or autobiographies.
Who's Homer's Iliad? Is that what is that one?
Homer's Iliad is about the Trojan War.
So the Trojan horse.
Trojan horse.
Well, the horse gets brought in.
That's right. That's right. So there are more. So let me backtrack a little bit here. When it comes, and by no means am I an expert. If you want experts, go and look at Wesley Huff.
Yeah, Wesley Huff is really...
There's a million more experts. I'm still very new in my journey on this, so I'm not declaring to be an expert.
Yet the evidence you're sharing comes from people like...
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So essentially, when we look at if something is historically reliable in the process of analysis of a text, there are many factors that come in. They're called attestations. And the factors are how many of the original manuscripts are there? How close to the event that they're writing about were these manuscripts produced? Are there manuscripts in multiple different languages so we can cross-reference to see the reliability of the original text? There are many, are the places the text is referring to, are they archaeologically proved by finding evidence of them existing if they actually don't exist today per se? And there's examples of that. So, for example, the Gospel of Thomas was absolutely, it's a Gnostic gospel, and it was seen as like not a reliable or accurate document because it was not talking about any places or towns, or there was no way to actually cross-reference when it was written in terms of like, was it reliable? Because it didn't speak of, it wasn't a historical report of what was happening at the time. It was a stream of consciousness ideas. So they couldn't actually validate that as being real because there was no cross-referencing available, whether it's historical places or various other things that they would use to cross-reference to make sure that that was a reliable document. Now,
real quick on that, for someone who's just getting to know Christ, they're going to be presented with the Book of Enoch or the Gospel of Thomas. You said,
Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Jesus's wife,
yeah,
just the
there's all these
Gospel of
things.
Mary.
Now, those just aren't the Bible. So it's important to distinguish.
The canon on the Bible is the Old Testament, which includes the first 5 books of the Torah, which is the Jewish books, and then all the way to the New Testament, all the way to the Book of Revelation. And there's a specific canon that was formulated at a meeting called the Nicene Creed, and this is where they chose the books. And when they chose the books, they chose them based on their ability to actually prove the historical validity of these books. They didn't just choose them because, that feels good, feels good. And in fact, and I'm going to go through these 10 pieces of evidence because we'll kind of unpack that as we go, but they actually chose the ones that were the most historically reliable. And you'll note that the way that the Bible is written is not like a stream of consciousness kind of feeling based. I mean, other than Psalms probably and Proverbs, but everything else is very much a historical report, particularly the Gospels. And we'll get into that. But the first criteria that they look at to prove if something is historically reliable, and what I mean by that is if, the events in it actually happened, is there actual, I think the ancient manuscript says 5,800 Greek manuscripts, 5,800 of the New Testament. And some are dating back to only 50 to 100 years past the writing of the original. So a manuscript is essentially a copy of the original, and they are dated 50 to 100 years after the events that they were writing about. Remember I said the closer to the event that they are writing about, the more valid it seems to be, because it debunks or vetoes this idea of like myth and legend getting in and things being exacerbated and pouring juice on it or whatever they say in this day and age.
Well,
and
why is that important? Because wasn't even if you invalidate that, then don't they be invalidating even the Trojan horse story?
Well, that's what I'm about to say next. Homer's Iliad, which I mentioned, which is Trojan horse story, as Jeff calls it, it was written 500 years after the event. So if we take some of the earliest Gospels, like the Gospel of Mark, which I believe was written 30 to 40 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, and then it's like almost 10 and a half times longer past the date, 10 and a half times longer past the date Homer's Iliad was written from the Trojan War. And that's fascinating. Like that's common sense to me.
Well, what's interesting is when I grew up in school, I remember opening up the books and always the history books and always seeing the picture of that horse. They have a little horse come in. This is the big thing that happened, and essentially, it would be like if I stood up in class today, I just want to let you know that this horse thing never happened. The Trojan horse never happened. They would say, "Well, you're crazy." Well, or let's say, okay, well, we agree it didn't. It would actually be if I were to invalidate that Christ existed, it'd be the same. I'd have to also invalidate the Trojan horse didn't happen either.
Or Alexander the Great.
Or wow. So what you're saying is if I deny that Alexander, I say nope, Alexander the Great never happened, neither the Trojan horse, then therefore I'd have to also say that Christ never died on the cross and rose again.
There's more evidence to support the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ than there is Homer's Iliad, the Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, any of it. There's more evidence to support the historical accuracy and validity that those events in the Gospels took place in any other book in history. And that's what's mind-blowing, because you'll get people out there, and right now there's this whole thing blowing up with the guy called Billy Carson. I actually feel a lot of empathy for him because I see a lot of myself, and I know you do in our old New Age versions of ourselves. I see a lot of myself in him.
He's a bit more amplified.
He's a little more amplified. Yeah, I get why. Like we were never on Joe Rogan.
Right. Didn't quite make it that far.
Didn't quite make it
Probably
that far, but so he's got more, I guess.
He's got more to lose.
Identity, like solidification than we did. So we were more malleable for the change.
Mm-hmm.
My point. Oh goodness, I've lost my point. No, so there are. What's mind blowing is there are a bunch of people out there like Billy Carlson who went and paid for a certificate from Harvard on, I don't even know what it was. It was like maybe ancient civilizations. I don't know. And then goes around and declares that he's like the world's leading biblical textual like scholar, which is a complete lie, to be honest, complete lie, that are spreading misinformation. So if you actually pull all that apart, you will find that more Christian and non-Christian scholars who are experts and leaders in biblical textual analysis agree that there is more evidence to support the Gospels, the historical record of what happened in the Gospels than any other book in history. That in itself.
But what if you identify as an expert? Does it make you an expert?
You can identify as anything these days.
I could identify as a car, but if I stay in my garage long enough, I don't turn into one.
That's awesome. Couldn't try it. We don't have a garage, or I'd suggest we try it.
Sit in the garage long enough, you don't turn into a car. Okay, you're a car. Go sit in the garage.
And now another thing I want to talk about. Point 2 is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in 1947, they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of that. They date back to 200 to 100 BC. And what is really interesting about this is related to the Old Testament. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were Old Testament documents. And when they did an analysis of these documents, they found that in 1,000 years, they were almost word for word exactly the same as what was on those scrolls. So this book, this series of books called the Old Testament have been rewritten, retranslated again and again and again, yet they're almost unchanged from what they were in 200 to 100 BC. And the Dead Sea Scrolls prove that because we have those fragments of those scrolls from the original text. And what's interesting is the scroll of Isaiah, because back then, in the synagogues, they would like get out the scrolls and
That's what I do.
You get out the scroll and you like read
Whenever
it with
I
your
read,
fancy outfit. We have a lot of Jewish friends. I love the Jewish people like immensely. Jesus was Jewish, so I've got a special place in my heart for the Jewish people. But the scroll is almost a word for word match to the modern book of Isaiah. That's mind-blowing to me.
Why is that so mind-blowing? I don't understand.
Well, you would think of Chinese whispers. Like we can't whisper one thing like through like 10 people without it completely changing, you know?
True, yeah.
Like, and now imagine 1,000 years of it being rewritten and copied, like the copying and the detail that those who are, or the Holy Spirit that's working through the people that are translating it is mind-blowing. Also, another thing that they'll look at is obviously so two things. First is how many manuscripts there are. Second is how accurate are those manuscripts to the original documents. That's what we just spoke about. The third thing is we want to look at archaeological evidence. So remember I said before that the reason the Book of Thomas was not included in the canons is because there was no way that they could validate the truth of what he was saying other than it was just some dude's opinions that is saying that it's Thomas. Like there's no way we can prove it. That's like the New Age, Somebody writes a book, they say they channeled it from the Palladians, and then, well, how can we validate that? A little bit like in,
Well, it felt right.
It felt right. That's right. Because feelings are facts. A little bit like Joseph Smith, he said that an angel came down and gave him some tablets, and that's how the Mormon religion was created, yet nobody can see or find those tablets. We have to be able to validate something. I need validation to be able to believe in something. I was fooled for too long. So,
well, that was actually, let's talk about that. After doing, I mean, you've done 10 Vipassana retreats.
Not Vipassana, Zen.
Oh.
It's basically the same thing.
Okay.
It's basically the same thing.
Then you've also done, that's where you spend 10 days in silence, right?
That is the Zen. So we have Zazen, which is similar to Vipassana, different meditation technique.
Okay.
Both streams of Buddhism.
Wait, look, you stared at a wall.
I stared at a wall for a really long period of time, and it hurt my back a lot.
All right. So you did multiple ones of those. And then you also were taking people do shamanic experiences in other countries like Vanuatu and things like that, right? Groups of people. So you've done that shamanic thing. You also you studied Buddhist philosophy as well. Okay.
Yeah, I studied Buddhist philosophy at university under a monk who was a Tibetan monk that was given his monkship. I don't know if that's actually how it's said, but by the Dalai Lama himself. So his name was Sonam. We used to call him Tech Monk because he was the most technologically advanced of all of our professors.
Well, then you also got the tattoo as well. You even got the
I got
right.
the Kali tattoo.
Yeah. Because you traveled all over India too. And so, and then you hit a point where it just exhausted itself, where it just like, you couldn't go any further, right? That's how I was too. And then that's when you started, you said the next thing, whatever this is, must have evidence. It must be logical, and it must have reasoning to back it up. It can't be what it feels. It's got to have evidence. And that's actually what led you to that.
Yeah, 100%. That's what led me to looking at apologetics. The whole reason I enrolled at Biola.
Can you explain apologetics, what that means?
So apologetics comes from the word apologia, which comes from the ancient Greek legal system, and it means to defend. And so an apologist is somebody who defends the faith. Wesley Huff is a wonderful example of that. There are many other apologists like Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell, his dad. There's so many of them. And our role is to have the evidence like we're going through today to prove the validity of what we believe. We defend the faith. It's 2 Peter that says, if anyone asks you, you should be able to defend I'm completely shifting that scripture, but essentially the Bible teaches us that we should give reason for why we believe what we believe. We should be prepared to always give reason. It shouldn't just be blindly believing anything.
And what's most important as well is our life becomes the testimony as well, as best possible.
100%. So what we might do is we still have 6 pieces of evidence to go through. We might actually split this up into 2 episodes.
Well, you could throw one more, and maybe someone needs that one more piece of evidence.
One more piece of evidence.
Just one more. And then they're like, okay, I'm taking Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I'm in. Give them that one more.
So another thing I started talking about, and we went off on a tangent, is the archaeological evidence. Can they prove that those places still exist? Are they still there, or have they been discovered? And this has actually happened a pretty significant amount of times. I'm going to speak today about just 3. I've just actually I've been doing Old Testament studies at Biola with Talbot School of Theology. It's fascinating how many of the places are still there today in Israel. It's mind-blowing. It's kind of cool. So there's been numerous archaeological discoveries to affirm the events that happened in the Bible. The first is the Hittite civilization, once thought to be fictional, was discovered and proven to be real. The second is a discovery of King David's inscription in Tel Dan Stele, 1993. That's if anyone wants a reference to that and you want to look it up. And basically it confirmed that he historically existed. King David was real. Many people were like, oh, it wasn't real. King David was real, and that was proven when they discovered the King David's inscription. And then we have also the excavations of Jericho. They show the city walls fell outward, aligning with what it spoke about in Joshua 6. So Joshua 6 talks about the fall of Jericho. And that's like 3 of
Well, that's a big thing. So basically just saying it's the things in the Bible, you can find physical evidence of it happening.
Yeah, and there's been many times where people that wanted to fight against Christianity going, oh, it's fiction. They'll be like, well, we haven't found the place where they used to bathe to get like magical stuff from the Roman gods. The story of Jesus with the paraplegic, and he would drag himself to this special pool. They found it. And if the name is escaping me right now. If you know it, please pop it in the comments.
That scene in The Chosen with the paraplegic was...
Correct. Yeah. It's a very well-known story and historical account, I think is a better term. and they found it. And so everyone, and everyone's like, oh, it's not real. And they found it. And that's happened many, many, many times. And if it's something that you're interested in, definitely look up more. There are more than just those three. There are numerous. And then what we'll discuss in the next episode, we'll look at eyewitness accounts, internal consistency, prophecies fulfilled, non-Christian historical sources, which is very interesting, geological accuracy, scientific accuracy, martyrdom, and why this matters. So that's what we're going to cover in the next
That
episode.
one about non-Christians is very fascinating. So there's a lot of non-Christians who verified the evidence of it happening.
Well, there were non-Christian historical sources. So there were people writing back then during the time of Jesus that weren't Christians. There were Jewish and Roman historians that actually validate the story that will corroborate the story that was told in the Gospels.
I think for me, the evidence presented itself in such a way that in order for me to not believe that it happened, I'd have to take a bigger leap of faith that it didn't happen. Yeah. And so it just, I landed on surrender that there's enough evidence here that I'd have to actually I'd take a bigger bet and it's not believing in it.
I agree. It takes more faith to not believe than to believe when you actually look at the evidence from Christian and non-Christian scholars. So team, please make sure that you have hit subscribe.
The Trojan horse.
Please make sure that you have hit subscribe and leave any comments, any feedback. Again, please give us grace. I'm no expert. I'm no leading scholar. I'm no Wes Huff or Sean or Josh McDowell. And we will see you next time. Make sure that you tune in for episode 2. Hit that subscribe button. Until next time.